Hi, I'm Bill Varney from FishTheSurf.com, and today we're going to talk about light line surf fishing. You know, people ask me all the time, what is light line surf fishing? So today we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly it is, what rigging or rods and reel combinations that we use, and a little bit about the history of surf fishing too. So if you went back to the 1960s and 50s and 40s and 30s, I got started in surf fishing in the 1960s. Our rods back then were 12 to 14 foot Calcuttas. We'd fish them with a Squidmaster or a Jigmaster filled with 40-pound test. We'd usually use like a 4-ounce sinker. Back then we'd have a 5-hook Gagnon. We'd take that thing, we'd cast it out as far as we possibly could cast it out, and then we'd put it down in our sand spike, and we'd sit down back in those days on our ice chest, and we'd wait for a bite. So many times we got a bite or the rod began to bend over and we jumped up and grabbed it and fought it into shore, and it'd be like a huge chunk of kelp and maybe a little tiny perch buried in there in one of those hooks somewhere. So as time went on, you know, we thought about it, and one day we're out floating on the lake and we were sitting out there thinking to ourselves and talking among ourselves and said, you know, if we were fishing a 14-foot rod at 40-pound test and a 4-ounce sinker and 5-hook Gagnon, what exactly would we be catching in the lake? Well, really nothing. And thinking about the lake, all the fish in the lake were about the same size as fish we'll find in the surf. Anywhere from, let's say, about 6 ounces up to 10 pounds. So why would we be using such heavy equipment? So in the early 70s, we put together our rod and reel combinations. Back then, we're looking at maybe a 7-foot rod with a little bait casting reel, 10-pound test. And that's when we first started fishing in the surf with lighter equipment. As we rode in the waves on our surfboards, we would look down most of the time, and almost always we would see Corbina scooting around back and forth right before we got to shore. We'd never see him on the outside, but we'd always see him very close to shore. So as a result of that, we came up with some really light equipment that was rated in such a manner as it would match the size of fish that we're fishing for. So first of all, probably 90% of the time, we're going to use a setup like this. This is a 7 to 9 foot parabolic rod. It's a rod that's got a lot of bend in the tip of the rod. That bend acts as a shock absorber on fish. Once again, 7 to 9 feet. These rods, you normally find these either as a custom-made surf rod or as a salmon steelhead trout rod, SST rod. One of the most popular rods to be used in the surf, really until recently, was these SST rods, which were salmon steelhead rods that were used up north. So we've replaced those with basically the same thing that we've designed for the surf, 7 to 9 feet in length, very parabolic in action, an excellent setup for the surf. You can get a rod like this anywhere from, let's say, $40 to $400, anywhere in between there. And as long as you rinse them off when you bring them home every day from the beach, wipe them down with a towel, that rod's going to last you your entire life. You can hand it down to your kids. The rods are something you can really spend some money on once you have a passion and love to do surf fishing. You can spend more on the rod because you know it'll last forever. On the other hand, the reel, and most of the reels that we're using in the surf are a 2000, a 2500, or a 3000 size spinning reel. This is a Penn Battle 2 3000 size reel. The reels and the way to look at reels in the surf is exactly the opposite as you'd look at rods. Because no matter how fast you are, quick you are, coordinated you are, young you are, agile you are, at some point you'll always drop your rod into the sand or into the surf or have water splash up on it. Won't hurt the rod at all, but when the reel's concerned, just one little grain of sand that gets inside this reel, it'll go right to the bearings, and within just a few minutes or a few hours, it'll freeze up and you won't even be able to turn the handle. So when it comes to surf fishing reels, try to stay under $100. Some really good choices out there. On the top end would be the Penn Battle 2 reel, this reel for example. Another couple great choices are Shimano's Sedona and Sienna. Those are $50 to $100 reels. And then Okuma's got some great reels also with the Avenger reels that are also going to run you probably around $60 each. A really good idea is when you see these reels on sale to buy an extra one, fill it up full of line, put it in the trunk of your car. So if you do have issues with your reel at the beach, you've got a new one right there ready to go. You can take it off, re-rig, off you go to catching some fish. Line wise on these spinning reels, I always use 6-pound test monofilament. The reason that I want monofilament is because there's a lot of stretch in the line. That's one of the great benefits of monofilament, is that with its stretch and the action at the end of the rod and the drag, all three of those in combination, work really well to provide drag for your fish when fighting it into shore. One thing you'll notice about the surf is you have waves rushing in, so pushing the fish in toward you, or your bait in toward you, and you're rigging in toward you, and you reel up the slack there. And then you also have the water after that sucking back out. And because you have these short durations of really hard push and pull, and you may have a large fish on, which of course is going to be most times sideways to you, you don't have enough time for your drag to kick in. So you need your rod to be limber and be able to bend. You need to fish monofilament line that has the stretch in it. And of course you need to have your drag set correctly. So this is the rod and reel combination. Once again, very easy to take care of. Just lean it up against a hedge in your yard, spray it down with a hose when you come home from the beach, dry it off with an old cotton sock, you're ready to go next time. That's the rod and reel combination, spinning wise, that we use in the surf. And then the second rod and reel combination that I use, probably use this 10% of the time. This would be for fishing something like a Lucky Craft, Battlestar bait, Rapala, Castmaster, Crocodile, any of those heavier jigs that I'm going to use particularly for white sea bass and for halibut fishing. So this rod, once again, this is a 7.5 foot rod. It has a medium bend in it rather than that very light, very flexible bend we find in the spinning rod. And the reason for that is when you cast this bait out, and boy are you going to cast it a lot of times, you have to tell yourself that I'm going to cast these lures 100 times before I get a single bite. So you're going to cast this a lot of times, and because you're going to put so much strength, so much speed into your cast, you want a stiffer rod. You don't need as limber of a rod because you're not casting bait or live bait. You're using lure, so you want a stiffer rod where you can really give it a hard cast out to sea. And that's what this is for. I like to match it up with a bait caster reel. This is a Shimano Corrado, and there's a lot of great other bait casting reels on the market. I load this reel up with 10-pound monofilament. I like to use monofilament whenever I use lures in the surf, because if I was to use straight braid, that would abrade and could break. Worse than that, it could get tangled with something offshore, and it'd be almost impossible for me to break my line, or certainly not be able to break it easily. The monofilament gives you that stretch that you're going to need, a little bit of stretch that you're going to need during the fight, although there's not that much to worry about that with fighting, because when you're fishing a Battlestar bait, for example, or a Lucky Craft, you basically have 9 hooks on there. You're not going to lose it, but you do need a little stretch in there. And then it's also going to help you with your casting. And then lastly, it's going to help you if you get snagged. It'll be easier for you to break off or unsnag possibly using the monofilament line. Just like with the rod and reel combination, the spinner, we're going to spray this off in the yard at the end of the day. We're going to wipe it down with a dry cotton sock, and we're ready to go fishing the next time. Perfect match to use. So once again, we've got the bait casting reel and the 7.5 foot to 8 foot casting rod, and then we've also got the spinning reel with the 6-pound monofilament. These are the 2 rod and reel combinations I like to use the most in the surf in Southern California. Now that's all we've really got to say really about the light line surf fishing. We really went from the heaviest lines possible down to the lighter lines in order to match the fish that we're catching in the surf. Thank you so much for watching today. I sure hope you learned something from fishthesurf.com.